I almost gave up on growing fruit entirely the third year I lived at altitude. I had spent 2 summers trying to grow the same fruit bushes I had grown at lower elevation, with no success whatsoever. Blueberries that sat in the ground and did nothing. Raspberries that died back so hard in winter that they never recovered enough to produce. A gooseberry that looked healthy all summer and then disappeared entirely after the first hard frost. I was spending money, I was spending time, and I was harvesting almost nothing. And the nursery kept selling me plants that were rated to -20 degrees Fahrenheit on the label, but that simply could not handle the specific cruelty of mountain winters. Not just the cold. The wind. The sudden temperature swings from 60 degrees Fahrenheit in the afternoon to 15 degrees Fahrenheit by midnight. The late frosts that arrive in May, when lowland gardeners are already harvesting strawberries. The short growing season that gives you 90 days if you are lucky and sometimes 70 days if you are not. And the ultraviolet radiation at altitude that pushes plant stress in ways that most growing guides never account for, because most growing guides are written by people who garden at sea level. The breakthrough came when I stopped trying to grow fruit that was adapted to somewhere else and started learning which fruit bushes had evolved specifically for the conditions I was dealing with. And what I found changed everything. Because there is an entire world of fruit-bearing shrubs that do not just tolerate mountain conditions, they were literally built for them. They evolved on exposed ridges, in alpine meadows, on rocky slopes at 7,000 feet and above, in places where winter is long and brutal and spring is brief and unpredictable. And when you plant these bushes in a mountain garden, something remarkable happens. They do not struggle, they explode. Because for the first time in their lives, they are in exactly the conditions they were designed for. Today, I am going to walk you through 12 fruit bushes that will not just survive in a mountain climate, but will outperform almost anything else you can grow. And I am going to give you the full picture for each one. Not just what it is and what it produces, but how it handles the specific challenges of altitude gardening, how to establish it, how to harvest from it, and how to think about it as part of a long-term food system rather than just a plant you stick in the ground and hope for the best. Because that is the difference between a mountain garden that feeds your family for decades and a mountain garden that frustrates you for a few seasons and gets abandoned. It is not luck. It is not a magical green thumb. It is choosing the right plants and understanding how to work with the conditions you actually have instead of fighting them. Number 1 is the honeyberry, also called haskap. And this is the plant I wish someone had handed me that first winter, instead of letting me waste 2 years on the wrong choices. The honeyberry, or Lonicera caerulea, is native to the mountain ranges of Siberia, northern Japan, and the high-altitude regions of Russia. And when I say native to Siberian mountains, I want you to really absorb that. This is a plant that evolved in conditions that make most mountain gardens in North America look mild. It handles -40 degrees Fahrenheit without blinking. It handles late spring frosts because it produces its flowers and sets its fruit so early in the season that it is usually finished fruiting before the frost-sensitive crops are even emerging from the soil. And in a mountain garden where late frost is one of your greatest enemies, this is not a minor detail. It is the entire reason this plant earns the top spot on the list. The fruit looks like an elongated blueberry, deep blue and slightly oblong, and the flavor is extraordinary. A complex blend of blueberry, blackcurrant, and raspberry, with a natural tartness that makes it one of the most interesting fruits you can grow. It is packed with antioxidant, the same antioxidant compounds found in blueberries, but at significantly higher concentrations because the plant evolved in harsh, high UV environments and produces these pigments as natural protection against intense sunlight. At altitude, where UV radiation is already elevated, your honeyberry bushes will produce fruit that is even more nutritionally dense than honeyberries grown at lower elevation. You are getting a health bonus from the very conditions that defeat other fruits. The bush itself grows to about 4 to 6 feet tall and equally wide over the course of 5 to 8 years. It is slow to establish, but once it is settled, it produces for 40 years or more without any significant replanting or replacement. You need at least 2 different varieties for cross-pollination to get a good harvest. Aurora and Tundra are an excellent pairing for mountain gardens. borealis is another outstanding variety that handles extreme cold and short seasons exceptionally well. Plant them 5 feet apart, in full sun, in well-drained soil, and mulch heavily after planting, with wood chips to protect the shallow root system during establishment. Harvest in early summer, usually June in most mountain climates, by laying a tarp under the bush and gently shaking the branches. Ripe honeyberries fall easily. Unripe ones stay attached. This means you can harvest the entire ripe crop in minutes rather than picking individual berries by hand. A mature honeyberry bush in a mountain garden will give you 5 to 10 pounds of fruit per season, and it will do this reliably, year after year, regardless of what the weather throws at it. Number 2 is the serviceberry, also called Juneberry or Saskatoonberry, and this is the fruit bush that the mountain landscape itself has been recommending to you all along. If you have ever looked at the hillsides around you and noticed the white spring blossoms on the native shrubs. Because in most mountain regions of North America, the serviceberry grows wild on hillsides, along creek beds, and at the edges of aspen groves. It is not an imported plant. It is not an experiment. It is already there, thriving in your climate without any human help whatsoever. And all you are doing by planting it in your garden is inviting that same resilience into a managed space where you can capture the harvest. The serviceberry, Amelanchier alnifolia in its Saskatoon form, produces clusters of small round fruits that look like blueberries but taste more like a sweet almond-flavored cherry. The flavor is mild and pleasant, not intensely complex like some berries, but deeply satisfying eaten fresh and exceptional when used in pies, jams and preserves. Indigenous communities across the Rocky Mountain region have eaten serviceberries as a staple food for thousands of years, drying them like raisins, combining them with meat and fat to make pemmican, and eating them fresh during the early summer harvest season. The bush grows vigorously in mountain conditions, reaching 6 to 15 feet, depending on the variety, and it tolerates everything, -50 degrees Fahrenheit cold, late spring frosts, high winds, poor rocky soil, partial shade, alkaline mountain soils that would destroy acid-loving plants like blueberries. It grows in conditions that most fruit bushes would refuse entirely, and it produces reliably even in years when late frosts damage other early flowering plants, because it is timed to the mountain spring in a way that commercial varieties simply are not. For a garden planting, choose varieties like Thiessen, Martin or Smoky, which have been selected for larger fruit size and heavier yields than wild plants. Plant them in full sun to partial shade in any reasonably well-drained soil. They do not need acidic conditions, they do not need rich amended soil, and they do not need much attention once established. A mature Saskatoon serviceberry will produce 10 to 15 pounds of fruit per bush per year and will do so for 30 to 50 years. Plant 2 or 3 for cross-pollination and for a longer harvest window, since different varieties ripen at slightly different times. Number 3 is the black currant, and this is where I want to talk about the particular relationship between cold climates and flavor intensity. Because black currants grown at altitude in mountain gardens are not the same fruit as black currants grown in the mild lowland gardens of England or the Pacific Northwest. They are more intensely flavored, more deeply colored, and more nutritionally concentrated, because the bush is responding to the stress of a short, intense growing season by packing everything it has into each individual fruit, and the result is a berry that tastes almost aggressively of itself. Dark, musky, rich, and complex in a way that no store-bought juice or jam can replicate. The black currant, Ribes nigrum, is native to the cold forests and mountainous regions of northern Europe and northern Asia. It handles -30 degrees Fahrenheit without damage. It tolerates late frosts better than most fruit because it blooms relatively late compared to other early season bushes. And it thrives in the cool, moist conditions of mountain springs and summers, in a way that plants from warmer climates simply do not. A mature black currant bush produces 10 to 15 pounds of fruit per year and is one of the most nutritionally dense fruits you can grow. Black currants contain more vitamin C per ounce than oranges, more antioxidants than blueberries, and high levels of gamma-linolenic acid, which is an omega-6 fatty acid not commonly found in plant foods. In traditional European homesteading, Blackcurrant was considered medicine as much as food, and the bushes were valued not just for their fruit, but for their leaves, which were used to make teas and tisanes throughout the winter. For mountain gardens, look for varieties like Titania, which was bred specifically for cold climates and has exceptional cold hardiness combined with high yields, or Ben Sarek, which is a compact variety that stays under 4 feet and is ideal for smaller mountain garden spaces. Plant in full sun to partial shade in rich, well-drained soil with plenty of organic matter. Prune out 1/3 of the oldest stems every year after harvest to keep the bush productive, because blackcurrants fruit most heavily on 2- and 3-year-old wood. Older wood becomes progressively less productive and should be removed at the base to encourage fresh new growth. Number 4 is the gooseberry, and I want to address something directly here, because gooseberries have a reputation problem that is entirely undeserved. In most of North America, people are barely aware that gooseberries exist as a garden plant, and among those who do know them, many associate them with the small, sour, seedy fruits of wild plants or old-fashioned varieties that were bred more for disease resistance than flavor. But modern gooseberry varieties, particularly those bred in Eastern Europe and Scandinavia for cold climate performance, are an entirely different experience. They produce fruit the size of a large grape, translucent green or deep red depending on the variety, and the flavor when fully ripe on the bush is sweet and complex, like a grape crossed with a plum, with none of the harsh sourness of the wild fruit. The gooseberry, Ribes uva crispa, handles cold better than almost anything else you can grow. -40°F is not a problem. It blooms early, which can make it vulnerable to late frosts in some mountain areas. But the bush itself is so vigorous that even if a frost damages the first flush of flowers, it will often set a second crop from later blooms. And in most mountain climates, a gooseberry bush in a sheltered south-facing position will produce a full crop every single year, regardless of weather. The challenge with gooseberries is the thorns. Old varieties are viciously thorned and make harvest a painful exercise. But modern varieties, like Invicta, Pax, and Hinnenmäki Red, have been bred with significantly reduced thorning while maintaining excellent flavor and yield. Pax in particular is nearly thornless and produces large, sweet, deep red fruit that ripens in late summer and tastes like a premium dessert fruit straight off the bush. A mature gooseberry in a mountain garden will produce 8 to 12 pounds of fruit per year for 20 years or more, with almost no care beyond annual pruning. Number 5 is the elder, specifically the American elderberry Sambucus canadensis, or its European cousin Sambucus nigra, both of which thrive in mountain conditions in different regions of the world. The elder is not a small plant. It is technically a large shrub or small tree that can reach 10 to 12 feet in height with an equal spread, and in a mountain garden it will reach this size within 3 to 4 years, because it is one of the most vigorous woody plants you can grow. But that vigor is exactly what makes it valuable, because a plant that grows fast in the difficult conditions of a mountain garden is a plant that is genuinely at home there. Elderberries produce massive flat-topped clusters of tiny dark purple fruits in late summer. A single mature elder bush can produce 12 to 15 pounds of fruit in a good year. The fruits are not particularly pleasant eaten raw in large quantities because they contain compounds that can cause nausea when consumed fresh, but cooked, fermented into elderberry wine, or simmered into a syrup with honey and spices. They are one of the most medicinally valued fruits in the temperate world. Elderberry syrup has been used in traditional European medicine for centuries as a treatment for colds and flu, and modern research has validated many of these traditional uses, finding significant antiviral activity in elderberry extracts. But beyond the fruit, the elder flowers are one of the great overlooked ingredients of homestead cooking. In early summer, before the fruit sets, the bush produces enormous flat clusters of tiny white flowers with a fragrance that is almost impossibly beautiful, sweet and musky, and floral all at once. These flowers can be dipped in batter and fried into elderflower fritters, steeped in hot water with lemon and sugar to make elderflower cordial, or used to infuse cream for desserts. In a mountain garden, where the growing season is short and the harvest calendar is compressed, having a plant that gives you a first crop of flowers in early summer and a second crop of fruit in late summer is an enormous advantage. For mountain gardens, plant elders in full sun in any moist, well-drained soil. They tolerate poor conditions better than most fruit bushes. They tolerate partial shade, they tolerate periodic flooding, and they handle high winds by simply bending and recovering rather than breaking. Plant at least 2 varieties for better pollination and higher yields. Bob Gordon and Adams are reliable choices for cold mountain climates. Number 6 is seabuckthorn, and this is the plant on this list that most mountain gardeners have never heard of, but that once they discover it, they cannot imagine their property without. The seabuckthorn, Hippophae rhamnoides, is native to the coastal cliffs and mountain slopes of Central Asia and Europe, growing wild from the Himalayas to the Siberian steppes, from the Alps to the Norwegian coast. It handles -40 degrees Fahrenheit without any damage. It grows in pure sand, in gravel, in rocky scree, in soil so poor that nothing else will establish. It fixes its own nitrogen from the atmosphere through symbiotic bacteria in its root nodules, which means it actually improves the soil around it rather than depleting it. And it tolerates wind, drought, salt spray, and compaction without complaint. The fruit is extraordinary. Small, bright orange berries pack so densely along the thorny branches that the stems are barely visible beneath them. The flavor is intensely sour and rich, almost overwhelming eaten plain, but mixed with honey or apple juice, it becomes one of the most complex and interesting fruit experiences you can have from a garden plant. Seabuckthorn is one of the most nutritionally dense fruits in the world. The berries contain more vitamin C than almost any other plant food, more vitamin E than wheat germ, significant levels of vitamin A, omega-7 fatty acids, which are almost unique in the plant kingdom, and a range of antioxidants that make the superfood marketing around blueberries look modest by comparison. The one challenge with seabuckthorn is that it is dioecious, meaning you need male and female plants to get fruit. You need 1 male plant for every 5 to 8 female plants. The male plants do not produce fruit, but they are necessary for pollination. Choose varieties like Leucora or Frugana for the females, which have been bred for exceptional fruit quality and yield, and plant 1 male of a compatible variety within 50 feet to ensure pollination. The thorns are formidable, and harvest requires either heavy gloves or the method of cutting entire fruiting branches and then stripping the berries off in a cold room once the branches have been briefly frozen, which makes the berries firm enough to strip cleanly without bursting. Number 7 is the Aronia berry, also called the chokeberry, and the name chokeberry is the reason this plant remains criminally underappreciated by home gardeners. The name comes from the intense astringency of the raw fruit, which is genuinely puckering if eaten plain. But here is the thing that nobody tells you when they describe the chokeberry as unpleasant to eat fresh. That astringency disappears almost completely when the berries are processed. Cooked into jam, dried like raisins, fermented into wine, blended into smoothies with sweeter fruits, or made into juice, Aronia is one of the most versatile and richly flavored fruits you can grow. And in Eastern Europe, particularly in Poland and Russia, where Aronia cultivation is a serious commercial industry, it is valued as one of the premier fruit crops for exactly these processed uses. The Aronia bush, Aronia melanocarpa, is native to the eastern mountain regions of North America and handles cold down to -35 degrees Fahrenheit without any protection. It is self-fertile, meaning you only need 1 bush to get fruit. It tolerates wet soils, dry soils, partial shade, alkaline conditions, and complete neglect with equal good humor. A mature Aronia bush reaches 6 to 8 feet in height and produces 15 to 20 pounds of fruit per year. The berries are jet black, slightly larger than a blueberry, and hang in heavy clusters that make harvest quick and efficient. The nutritional profile of Aronia is remarkable. It has the highest antioxidant content of any commercially measured berry, higher than blueberries, higher than elderberries, higher than cranberries. The deep black color of the fruit comes from an extraordinary concentration of anthocyanins, and the same compounds that make the raw fruit astringent are precisely the compounds responsible for its health value. For a mountain garden where you want to maximize the return on every square foot of growing space, Aronia offers more nutritional output per bush than almost any other fruit you can grow. Number 8 is the lingonberry. And if you live in a mountainous region with acidic soil, you may already have wild lingonberries growing on your property without knowing it. The lingonberry, Vaxillium vitis idea, is one of the defining plants of the boreal and subalpine ecosystem. It grows wild across the mountain ranges of Scandinavia, Russia, Canada, and the northern United States, forming dense low mats of evergreen foliage under conifer forests and on exposed rocky slopes at high altitude. And because it is an evergreen, it provides food for wildlife and humans in a landscape where evergreen plant material is otherwise scarce. The fruit is small, bright red, and intensely flavored with a tartness and complexity that is entirely its own. In Scandinavian cuisine, lingonberry jam is as fundamental as ketchup is in North American cooking. It accompanies everything from meatballs to pancakes to wild game because its tart intensity cuts through rich fatty foods in a way that is both palatable and digestively beneficial. In a mountain homestead context, lingonberries preserve exceptionally well, and because they contain natural benzoic acid, they can be stored for months in water without any processing at all, making them uniquely valuable as a long-term food storage crop. The challenge with lingonberry is the same as blueberry. It requires acidic soil with a pH between 4.5 and 5.5 to thrive. If your mountain soil is naturally acidic, as many conifer-forested mountain soils are, you can plant lingonberries directly into amended beds with added sulfur and pine bark compost. If your soil is neutral or alkaline, grow them in raised beds or large containers filled entirely with acidic growing medium. The plants are slow-growing, reaching only 8 to 12 inches in height, but they spread by underground runners to form a dense, productive mat over time. A well-established lingonberry patch will produce indefinitely, literally, for decades, requiring only occasional top dressing with acidic compost and pine needle mulch. Number 9 is the buffalo berry. And this is the most specifically mountain native plant on this entire list, because the buffalo berry, Shepherdea argentea, is a plant of the Rocky Mountain foothills and high plains. Native to elevations between 3,500 and 7,000 feet across the western mountain ranges of North America. It grows wild along creek banks, on exposed slopes, and in dry mountain valleys from Alberta to New Mexico. It is one of the hardiest woody plants in existence, handling -50 degrees Fahrenheit without any damage and growing in conditions of drought, wind, poor soil, and extreme temperature fluctuation that would destroy virtually every other fruit plant on this list. The fruit is small, bright red, and intensely sour in a way that is similar to a cranberry, but with additional complexity and a slight bitterness that makes it genuinely acquired taste territory for fresh eating. But cooked into jelly or jam with sugar, the buffalo berry transforms completely into one of the most distinctive and delicious fruit preserves you can make from a wild or cultivated plant. Indigenous communities of the Great Plains and Rocky Mountain regions gathered buffalo berries as a major seasonal food source and used them as a flavoring for buffalo meat, mixing the berries into meat dishes to add acidity and brightness in the way that Mediterranean cooks use tomatoes or vinegar. Like seabuckthorn, the buffalo berry is dioecious and requires both male and female plants for fruit production. Plant one male for every 3 to 5 females in a cluster for reliable pollination. The plants grow quickly to 6 to 12 feet tall and equally wide, forming dense thorny thickets that double as windbreaks and wildlife habitat while producing fruit. The silver-green foliage of the buffalo berry is also beautiful in the garden, giving the plant ornamental value beyond its fruit production. Like seabuckthorn, the plant fixes its own nitrogen and improves the soil around it over time, making it an excellent pioneer plant for establishing productive ground in difficult mountain conditions. Number 10 is the high-bush cranberry. And before I say anything else, let me clarify that despite the name, the high-bush cranberry is not a true cranberry. It is Viburnum trilobum, a native North American shrub related to the ornamental viburnums that are commonly grown in gardens across the continent. But what it shares with the true cranberry is a similar fruit flavor profile, tart and complex and richly colored, and a similar preservation quality, keeping for months in cool storage or processing beautifully into jelly, juice, and sauce. The high-bush cranberry is native to the northern mountain forests of North America and handles cold down to -40 degrees Fahrenheit with complete equanimity. It grows in partial shade, in moist soils, along creek banks, and at the edges of aspen and birch forests. It is self-fertile, requiring only one plant for fruit production. And it produces heavily, a mature bush reaching 8 to 10 feet in height, with an equal spread and yielding 10 to 15 pounds of bright red translucent berries every fall. The fruit hangs on the bush well into winter, providing food for birds and remaining available for harvest, even after heavy frosts. In fact, the flavor of high-bush cranberry improves dramatically after the first hard freeze, which breaks down some of the compounds responsible for the raw fruit's somewhat musky flavor and concentrates the tartness and sweetness into something genuinely excellent. Harvest after the first hard frost, process into juice or jelly, and you have a cranberry sauce equivalent from your own property that costs nothing and requires no grocery store involvement. The ornamental value of the high-bush cranberry is also exceptional. The spring flowers are large, flat-topped white clusters that attract pollinators in great numbers. The fall foliage turns brilliant red and orange, and the clusters of red berries against winter's snow create one of the most beautiful winter garden scenes you can produce in a mountain landscape. This is a plant that earns its space in a mountain garden multiple times over across 4 separate seasons. Number 11 is the hardy kiwi. And I know what you are thinking because I thought the same thing the first time someone told me kiwi could grow in a mountain climate. The kiwi from the grocery store, with its brown fuzzy skin and tropical reputation, has no place in a mountain garden. But the hardy kiwi, Actinidia arguta, is an entirely different plant from an entirely different climate. It is native to the mountain forests of Siberia, northern China, Korea, and Japan, and it handles -25 to -30 degrees Fahrenheit without any protection when properly established. It is not a tropical plant masquerading as a cold-hardy one. It is genuinely cold-hardy at the genetic level. The fruit of the hardy kiwi is the size of a large grape, smooth-skinned and eaten whole without peeling, with the familiar kiwi flavor of the grocery store fruit, but more intense and more complex because it is being grown in a cool mountain climate where sugars concentrate more slowly and the fruit develops greater depth. The vines are extraordinarily productive. A single mature hardy kiwi vine, which requires a sturdy trellis or pergola to support it, can produce 50 to 100 pounds of fruit per year at peak production. That is not a typo. 50 to 100 pounds from a single vine. The challenge is patience. Hardy kiwi takes 3 to 5 years from planting to produce its first significant harvest. It requires male and female plants, with one male for every 6 to 8 females. And it requires substantial structural support because the vines grow vigorously and become heavy with fruit. But once established, a hardy kiwi vine is essentially permanent infrastructure. It will produce heavily for 40 to 50 years. Varieties like Anna, Ananasnaya, and Ken's Red are excellent choices for mountain gardens in zones 4 through 7. Number 12 is the Alpine strawberry, and I want to close this list with something that might seem modest compared to the 40-year kiwi vine or the nitrogen-fixing seabuckthorn thicket, but that is in many ways the most perfect mountain garden plant of all because it asks almost nothing and gives almost constantly. The Alpine strawberry Fragaria vesca is the wild strawberry of the European and North American mountain forests. It grows wild at altitude across most of the temperate mountain ranges of the world, producing tiny, intensely flavored fruits on low mats of evergreen foliage from early summer through the first hard frosts of autumn. The fruits are small, no larger than your thumbnail, but the flavor is so concentrated and so perfectly strawberry that eating one is a more intense experience than eating a fruit twice its size from a grocery store. The Alpine strawberry produces no runners. It stays in a neat clump that expands slowly over the years rather than spreading invasively. And unlike garden strawberries, which produce a single concentrated harvest and then rest for the season, the Alpine strawberry produces continuously from June through October in most mountain climates, giving you a small but steady daily harvest throughout the entire growing season. From seed, Alpine strawberry plants take one season to establish and begin producing the following year. From transplant, they often produce a small crop in their first summer. They tolerate partial shade, which makes them perfect for underplanting among the taller fruit bushes on this list, creating a productive ground layer beneath the serviceberries and elders and gooseberries that would otherwise go to waste. They handle mountain cold effortlessly, dying back to their crown in winter and re-emerging reliably every spring for 5 to 8 years before gradually declining and needing replacement. And because they produce from seed so easily, you will always have an ongoing supply of new plants from the seedlings that appear naturally around established clumps. Varieties like Mignonette, Rugen and Alexandria are the best performers for mountain gardens. All three produce reliably in short seasons, handle cold and heat swings with equal grace, and deliver that extraordinary concentrated flavor that makes the Alpine strawberry one of the most rewarding fruits in the entire mountain garden toolkit. Now, here is the system inside that ties all 12 of these plants together and transforms them from a collection of individual bushes into something much more powerful. Mountain gardens have one fundamental constraint that all lowland growing guides ignore, which is time. Not just the shortened season, but the compressed window in which establishment, growth, and harvest all have to happen. And the way you work with that constraint, rather than against it, is by thinking in layers and sequences rather than in single isolated plantings. The serviceberry and the elder are your pioneers. They establish fastest, tolerate the most difficult conditions, and begin producing within 2 to 3 years. Plant them first on the windward edges of your garden space, where they will act as windbreaks and create a sheltered microclimate for the more demanding plants behind them. The seabuckthorn and buffaloberry serve the same pioneer function on the driest and most exposed sections of your property, where even the serviceberry might struggle to establish quickly. Behind that pioneer windbreak layer, you establish your main production layer. The honeyberry, gooseberry, black currant, and Aronia fill this middle zone. These are your highest volume producers, your most reliable annual harvesters, your bread and butter fruit crops that will supply the bulk of your preserved and fresh fruit for decades. Plant them in your best sun-exposed positions, with good drainage and wind protection from the pioneer layer you established first. In the partial shade created by the taller pioneer plants, you establish your lingonberry patches and your alpine strawberry ground cover. These shade-tolerant perennial plants turn otherwise unproductive shadow space into continuous low-level harvest areas, filling in the gaps between your productive bushes with plants that ask almost nothing and give fruit from June through October. On the sunniest and most protected south-facing wall or fence of your property, you train your hardy kiwi vines. This is the most productive square footage in the entire mountain garden, and the hardy kiwi is the plant best positioned to exploit it fully, producing 50 to 100 pounds of fruit per vine per year once established. The warmth reflected from a south-facing wall or fence adds critical heat units during the short mountain season and pushes the kiwi toward reliable heavy fruiting, even at elevations where the general season would otherwise be marginal for this plant. The highbush cranberry and the Aronia fill the wetter, lower-lying areas of your property, where drainage is poorer, and where other plants might suffer from seasonal waterlogging. These plants tolerate moist soils exceptionally well, and by placing them in the areas where other plants struggle, you turn your garden's least productive zones into contributing members of the overall food system. And finally, the miracle of the mountain garden that most lowlanders never understand is that the very conditions that make mountain gardening seem difficult are the conditions that produce the most flavorful, most nutritionally dense, most intensely developed fruit. The short season concentrates sugars. The cold nights preserve and amplify flavors. The high UV radiation drives the production of protective antioxidant compounds in the fruit. The temperature swings that kill tender plants push hardy mountain native plants to produce as if every season might be their last, packing maximum nutrition and flavor into every berry, every cluster, every harvest. You are not gardening in spite of the mountain. You are gardening with it. And every one of the 12 plants on this list knows exactly where it is when it is growing in your garden, because it evolved in a place exactly like it. The gardener who tries to force a subtropical blueberry to survive a mountain winter will be buying fruit at the grocery store forever. The gardener who plants a honeyberry hedge and a serviceberry windbreak and a gooseberry production row in February will be harvesting from a productive, permanent, layered food system by year 3 and will still be harvesting from that same system 30 years later with minimal labor, minimal cost, and the quiet confidence of someone who understood from the beginning that the mountain is not the obstacle. The mountain is the advantage. The system in one sentence: plant what belongs there, layer it intelligently, and the mountain climate will do the rest.